So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of the MetalCorps podcast. As always, I'm George, and because today's an interview, it's only me. It's Roger's day off when I'm doing interviews. So today, for those that uh, are listening in a podcast platform and not watching on YouTube, is this my left or my right? So this side is Alex, and down there. Uh, so for those of you who don't listen, the window is like me and Alex are on the top, and Christian's on the window under us in the middle. So and they're coming all the way from Bristol, where they are part of the Sacred Conclave. I got the pronunciation wrong now. It's conclave or conclave?
It is the conclave. That's it. You got
Conclave. I should say my English before we started. So yeah, they're gonna talk about what they're doing there, the Sacred Conclave, about themselves and whatever comes. If you are listening, watching regular this podcast, you know that we never stick to the script anyway. So, so over to you guys. So let's start a little bit about yourselves, and then we can start talking about your ministry or your church or however you want to call it. You call yourself pastors or something like, or reverends or like popes or something.
What was the name conclave? Maybe we should.
I only say like I found
no.
the whole title pastor very cringy. I say whoever calls me pastor, I'll break their knees. I, I have a name.
Well, certainly neither of us have in any way the official title of pastor. No, definitely not. And actually, we would also say the Sacred Conclave as a thing, whilst it is a gathering for those who are into rock and metal and also looking to explore, faith and what it means to follow Christ in the 21st century. We aren't running it like as a traditional church, as you might think of it. And so, if it's language you'd understand, we'd call it more like a parachurch thing, in that we have people from all sorts of different churches across the city of Bristol and further afield who come along to our gatherings and take part in what we're doing. And yeah, there's no like Pope headdress or like or robes or anything like that going on. So
maybe we do like do something like metal garments.
yeah, we could do like a sort of Batushka sort of style thing. That could totally work. Yeah, sure.
Or like school uniforms, like the
Yeah.
ACDC.
CDC.
Brilliant. But no, Alex, did you want to just say a hello and a little introduce of yourself?
So, yeah, I'm Alex. Hiya. I mean, there's not much to say about me, but where I fit into this whole thing is we run a whole, not just the Sacred Conclave, but a whole network called the Conclave Network, and so it's a whole sort of group of groups, and there's one, for example, for board games called our Gamers Conclave. There's a Role Players Conclave, and there's an Alternatives Conclave, and then there's the Sacred Conclave as well. So currently we have 4 conclaves which make up the Conclave Network, and that's because we find that there's a lot of crossover between people who are metalers, people who role play, people who like board games, and then there's a little group of us within that are.
So when you say role play, to clarify, we're talking about cosplay.
Yeah, so it's like so like Dungeons and Dragons is the sort of go-to one that people would know about. But yeah, tabletop role playing or live role play, which is a lot more like cosplay, or like battle reenactment kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So those sorts of areas.
So the battle reenactments are part of the conclave, because I saw some pictures on your profile, on your Facebook profile.
Yeah, well, so basically each conclave has its sort of thing that it's about, and then we'll have essentially a Facebook group, and we'll have like meetings and stuff, depending on what it is. So with the board game one, we meet through board games. But when it comes to like the role players one, for example, you know, there are events sometimes where we meet up and play role playing games, but there are also big like live role play events that are on. And so the Facebook group will give, you know, people can talk about it. I'm going to this one. Who's going to that one? You know, should we make a little group together? Let's go to this and all that. So there's kind of two elements in a sense to all of them. You know,
so the other groups are not necessarily around metal.
Yeah, exactly. So so the board game one, it's not about metal really. It's just about board games, and the role playing one is just about about role playing. But then the other one is alternative, so it's about metal and goths and alternatives.
So that's the Sacred Conclave.
No, so there's four, but there's one that's that's just for like, well, it's just about alternative culture in general. And then we've got the Sacred Conclave, and the Sacred Conclave is the final one where, you know, we have meetings where people can come and explore, you know, what they believe and that sort of thing with other people who are like-minded. And, you know, there are people from all across the network there. So people who have met us through board gaming and stuff will come along and, you know, and then they'll see us there and they'll start talking us about, you know,
so the
what
Sacred Conclave is more, if you could call it, it's like the churchy stuff. In a way.
Yeah,
the churchy stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
If we like to for clarity purposes, like is where the.
Yes, exactly. It's the one where we have a gathering that is essentially a bit like a church service. We meet in the upstairs of a pub. It's a sort of it's a pub with a real sort of rock and metal history within the city of Bristol. And so we meet up there.
Which one is this? Just for people to, if anyone's listening from Bristol and.
Yeah, it's called the Hatchet, and it's right in the middle of the city centre. It's reputedly the oldest pub in the city as well, so it's got all sorts of rich history going on. But we meet there once a month, and then we have what is essentially a kind of like a church service, but really not like obviously a normal church service, because we have a band, and so we play heavy worship, and that's sort of everything from the lighter end of a sort of pop punk, you know, Blink 182 style arrangements of songs, through to like real, you know, heavy sort of death, doom, you know, blackened kind of style. So because essentially we know we've got a bunch of people who are coming along who like all sorts of different styles. We know within the metal scene. There's plenty of variety.
So is it like a band that is put together for the Sacred Conclave purpose, or is it an existing band that comes and joins you?
No. So originally, when it first formed, because originally the Sacred Conclave was something I set up about 5 years ago, called Metal Church. Nothing to do with the band Metal Church. But
it gives very good SEO, isn't it?
Yeah, there you go.
People looking for metal to listen and landing to us.
Yeah, we had a few raised eyebrows when we sort of like, you know, books, rehearsal rooms and stuff like that. But no. And so from when I first set that up, that was actually formed out of a bunch of guys who I was playing with in a worship team in the church that we were at the time. And
they happened to be metalheads.
Yeah, and that church was also really quite relaxed about us experimenting with our worship space on Sunday mornings even. They really were very relaxed. And so we were playing kind of like quite heavy rock style stuff anyway. You know, we were playing like down-tuned B kind of, you know, so it was a real chunky sound we were using. And then that band really was sort of formed the start of the band that we then used for the Sacred Conclave, because we've been playing together for a while anyway, so it was relatively easy to get it going. Now that's morphed over time. Lockdown obviously meant that it sort of went on hiatus for a while, and part of the story of it all becoming Sacred Conclave and part of the Conclave network was that after lockdown, we essentially relaunched everything. And so Metal Church became the Sacred Conclave and became part of the Conclave network, because Alex and I were running all this other stuff as well. And we were like, this is probably a bit stupid having all these things separate, because we've got loads of friends who are into Dungeons and Dragons, but they'd also love to explore faith. But they probably would feel a little bit uncomfortable going to a very traditional church, whereas going to the upstairs at the Hatchet pub in the city centre, which many of them will know anyway, is like, this is very comfortable.
Dress up like an orc or something.
Yeah, that's it. There you go. And so it just makes it much more relaxed as a sort of a way of, well, people exploring. If that's what they want to do, they're very welcome to. So the Sacred Conclave kind of formed out of that band, and now we have a band that plays each week. So I do the vocals and play guitar in that, and there's a bunch of us. We write our own stuff and use some of our own songs, as well as taking like really popular, well-known, contemporary Christian worship songs that you might sing in church on a Sunday morning, but then just redoing them in a much heavier style. So that's how we roll with it.
So let me ask you that with a pub, was it like difficult to find a space to do that? Because I mean, we were trying to do something, not like like I said, almost like putting like a gig with local bands, not even Christian bands, like local bands. And we found the venues they're not very like excited on putting, like, especially us going as part of the Salvation Army. Not, we go like really like, we don't go like that, like big. It's like this is who we are. We're part of the Salvation Army. Like we want to do this. Like,
we starting at the beginning. I mean, the Metal Church was meeting in a space that the church that it sort of came out of used for kind of other stuff, and it was in the middle of like an industrial estate, and had an upstairs space, and it was quite a nice space in a way, but it was out of the way, and then so that carried on, and then it was locked down, and then we talked about relaunching under a new thing, and before we then relaunched and things were starting to open up again, I just said to Christian, why don't we just ask around? Let's go to some various places where we think they might say yes. But the important factor is that rather than just being like, hi, can we use your space to do a gig sort of thing, we were coming along with a kind of a more, because the Conclave network is not just that. So we've got the once a month we want to have a gig type thing in the room upstairs, but also once every other month we want to gather loads of people from across the network to have a big social, and then and we were looking for a space for board games and all this stuff. And so I was like, we can just go around and ask a bunch of sort of places and pubs, and in Bristol we're very lucky, we've got a few places which are like based on gaming, on geek culture, etc. So there's the Geek Retreat here. There's a place called Replay, which is another board game cafe. There's Chance Encounters, which is another board game cafe, and there's a whole load. So I was just like, let's go around and ask them, and basically just see what the best offer we get is. And
Can I jump in here, Alex? Can I jump in? Because one thing I would say, and I think that this was instrumental in us really developing a good relationship with the management at the Hatchet Pub, was Alex worked really hard on developing a whole bunch of stuff before we even did that. So Alex does a lot. Alex is an illustrator, by trade, and so he did some amazing work on creating, I suppose, a look for the stuff that we were taking out there, and he did lots of preparatory work so that when we went into the pub, and let's face it, they just wanted to make some money. They wanted to run good events and make money, and we did a straightforward pitch. Really, is what it was, and we had, laptop with all of our website on there and all of the graphics and saying how the Sacred Conclave fitted into everything else. And I could tell, like, within just a couple of minutes, the manager of the pub was like, "You guys are really organized. You're really up together. You know what you're doing.
I can make money out of it as well." So it's kind of
exactly. I mean, he just cares about having people come in and it being like a well-run thing. And it's a metal pub, and so they're quite happy to have metal bands playing there. They quite wanted that sort of thing.
Because I guess like people that they kind of, I guess you have people just standing up for the music, isn't it? I would guess.
Yeah,
so.
I mean that's the plan. Is that when we do the live music, that well, what's happened is, of course, that the value proposition of just saying come and listen to some Christian metal is not high for people who are just not Christian at all and don't know anything about church. But when we gather people and we building friendships with people because we love to play board games together and role playing games together, and we've got loads of common, like we go out nights out together, etc. Then they're like, well, and I say, Christian does the live stuff, don't you? And they're like, oh yeah. And I say, you should come and listen to Christian do, performance. It's like Christian metal stuff. And then, some of them are like, oh well, fair enough, sort of thing, and they just come. We're just building that as we go, really, and it's just convincing people that you're not walking into like a church. It's no big deal. It's just some Christian music. Just come and it's in the pub. Just pop in and then have a drink, and then when you're done, you whatever. So some of them come for the music, and then they pop out for a cigarette when there's like the time for a talk or discussion and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's just taking the stigma out of it, really, and just getting people along and like, oh yeah, that was cool. Listen to Christian metal, no big deal, and so yeah, that's that's been going really well. But it's having that platform to then make friends with people and then want to come along.
But anyway, Christian. I mean, I personally, I don't like I don't like the title Christian metal, because for me it's like it's metal, but it's all for the sake of so we can know what we're talking about. So yeah. So Christian metal now is kind of, it's not as it was like 20, 30 years ago, where it was like grinchy and people were laughing at it. Not that it was like to laugh for, but it's kind of, they were laughing to it, like, because it's like, Christians, they think they can. But now they're like a lot of very, like, tens of very good bands out that they're Christian and like have people like they have like mainstream success.
Yeah.
So for someone to listen to Christian metal is not so much like something groundbreaking anymore. Like even atheists. I mean, I have a nephew. I don't think he's an atheist, but he's like non-religious. He was asking me to send him some Christian black metal bands, like because he just was exploring Christian black metal, basically. Like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, listen. This is one of the things that I think, in terms of what the philosophy is around it, for us, metal is an art form, and for me, what is at the center of my life and the core of my being is my relationship with my God, and so therefore that just naturally spills out in all sorts of ways in my life. And of course, one of those ways is in my creative endeavors, such as they are. And so when it comes to doing worship at Sacred Conclave, when we do a gathering, yes, we're playing Christian metal because we're Christians playing metal. It's that old kind of thing.
Yeah.
But of course, the songs that we're playing, I mean, some of them are worship songs you might sing on a Sunday morning, completely rearranged in our sort of much heavier style, and some of it's stuff that we've just written ourselves. So for us, it's a very natural outflowing of our relationship with Christ, that the music that we create is something that we can use in that kind of gathering. So it feels, I know what you're saying, it's that awkward sort of misnomer almost of calling it Christian metal, because there's so much baggage attached to that title. but we will even use, yes, we'll use some songs that other bands have played, bands like Sleeping Giant and so on. We'll take some of those songs and we'll use those because they work really well for sort of worship style
Yeah.
Christian gatherings in the metal scene. But we have heavy versions of songs like Oceans and stuff like that. Like
Not the oceans.
exactly. So we make our own versions of these, and so yes, they probably sound quite a bit different. But again, this is just our natural expression. I often say at the start of when we're playing, this is our worship. And it's us playing metal and having a great time playing metal, but we're all worshiping in that moment. And of course, the setting that we're in allows people to, in a very relaxed way, engage in it as metal worship for themselves as well, and they can sing or scream or growl along or whatever they're doing. So and enjoy themselves whilst they're doing it, hopefully. And then yes, it's followed by a talk afterwards, a Bible-based talk. And we always do discussion. We do it on a Sunday evening. We're not going to sit in a pub on a Sunday evening and I'm going to preach for 40 minutes. It just doesn't work like that. So yeah, we do lots of discussion around, and then there'll be some sort of talk content as well. So it gives people a real chance to dig into the skin, dig under the skin, if you like, of faith, and ask the important questions that actually is quite difficult to do often in a normal traditional church setting as well. So
Yeah. And I think part of what metal is, and personally, I think when you get people that the Christian, like the Christian metalheads, and not metalheads that are Christian, it's kind of the metal, not the Christian side of metal, has a lot to teach to the church, but not so much to teach, like to remind of the actually what was Jesus' message, basically. It doesn't teach anything new. It's most like metal, for me, challenges the church to go back on Jesus' original teachings. Like, it's actually metal is all about this, like, and I guess when you kind of sanitized it within like the Christian world, you're missing that prophetic. That you first of all you ditching all the criticism out. So all the songs that they criticize Christianity, you don't listen to them, and you don't get the opportunity to actually say, okay, that Christian might be valid. That person that wrote that song might be correct, and then what we're doing about it. Yeah. So
yeah, one of the things that you're making me think of the Impending Doom song, where he really rips on you might say a more traditional Christian communities and the way that they have attacked and been very sort of denigratory, I suppose, of Christian metal musicians being out there and doing it. And of course, in
which song you're referring to?
That one is, it's off their 2007 album. I'm trying to remember the title of it now. I can find it and we can put it in the show notes for reference on that one.
Yeah, because it was like putting the link as well, like
exactly. That's it. Yeah. So
but Impending, I love Impending Doom.
Yeah. So, and it's a great song. It was one of their early singles that was that really blew up. Yeah. So, and I mean, I find it really disappointing and frustrating when we have these sort of internal wranglings as Christians, and we're battling around all of this stuff. And of course, we're always managing that tension of wanting to be those who hold to what we understand as being truth, and biblical faith, and orthodox, and all those kind of things. It's important. And then, of course, we're always trying to work out, but what does it really look like to follow Christ in the 21st century? And how are we doing that in a sort of biblically faithful way? And that's certainly something that, through Sacred Conclave, I think what we're trying to do is to really dig into what does it actually look like to be a Christian, because I think as Christians, that is to be our first identity. but then also as Christians who identify with the sort of rock and metal scene and what's going on there, and how are we to be us in that scene. And of course, the challenges, a lot of Christians have experienced a lot of alienation, should we say, Christian metalheads. I'm actually doing a master's at the moment, and my dissertation is on alienation amongst Christian metalheads and the challenges of being a Christian metalhead and being a part of mainstream Christian church, and the sort of attendant difficulties with that. And and they're there. There's no doubt about it, because there is a lot of prejudice, of course, against a lot of the trappings of the metal scene.
My main church, I'll say main church because like Fireblood doesn't exist as a formal church yet. So I could say my sending church or whatever. I think they got used of me turning up with like death t-shirts and like Sunday. What I was wearing Sunday, I think I was wearing Cannibal Corpse. But there's like I bought like one kind of, not not that. So it wasn't the vial, to put it. So I found something that's kind of like appropriate to wear in church. Hard for a Cannibal Corpse, but like I found something.
And that's the inherent tension, isn't there? When we have this art, which is dark and it's macabre, and there's all of these elements that are part of the scene. One of the things that we're trying to work out is what is my conscience telling me about me wearing this T-shirt or listening to this band or so on and so forth. Alex and I have had some really quite in-depth conversations. When we're setting up something like Sacred Conclave and we're choosing, like background music that's going to be played there, and we're going to have people maybe asking us our opinion, and we're not pastors, remember, but people asking us our opinion about what they should be listening to or not, and so on. We've had to sort of come to our own sort of position, and there are still questions that we have that we're still working through. I mean, that's part of the nature of being in community, isn't it? And trying to work out some of these difficult things. But yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. But certainly, I think one of the things that we're big on is you need to be consuming whatever media according to your conscience. If you're a Christian, that you're praying that through, and it doesn't do to get really super wound up about these things. I don't think that's how Christ would want us to be living. But at the same time, it's just sometimes I can be listening to something. And very occasionally, this happens very rarely for me, but occasionally I'll be listening to something, I'll be like, oh, this is making me think of something I just don't want to think about. And okay, next song.
That's your personal boundary, though, isn't it?
Say again?
That's your personal boundary, isn't it?
Yeah, precisely. Exactly.
And everyone has to, decide their own. My opinion is like,
yes,
because we get asked this question often. I think it's like one of the most frequent questions we get asked as when you lead this kind of things. What, first of all, can you listen to non-Christian music, and what kind of, and I mean, most of the music I listen is non-Christian.
Yeah.
That's not by choice, that's organic. Especially when I'm more into extreme metal. Especially when you get to extreme metal, it's like, you don't have a lot of Christian bands anyway. By definition, it's like, and let's put it, no one's Cannibal Corpse, no one's Slipknot.
That's right. Yeah.
No one is, what was, I don't know, Bad Religion, for instance, if you're into punk. Like, those bands are unique. So if you want to listen to their type of music, you have to listen all them. So, but it's not like a choice I made. It's like, it's kind of happened. And I always say to people, like, you have to decide for yourself. I can't tell you what to listen or not.
Yeah.
If God doesn't want you to listen to something, he's not gonna come to tell me to tell you. He's a big boy. He can tell you directly. Like.
Alex, we've had some conversation about this. What was your sort of particular take on what we should be comfortable listening to or not?
Well, I think that it always comes back to the Romans 5 thing about eating meat sacrificed to idols, and that Paul's talking about how, in essence, it's meaningless. The value of the meat, the sacrifice to the idol, is kind of a non-thing. And so, on one hand, you've got the level where he's like, if you know that and you do it, it's it's fine. But the problem comes if you do it and then people who think it is wrong do it because you're doing it, then they are going against their own conscience. And so that it's very complicated. So I'd recommend that people go off and literally read and study that passage. But for them, in essence, it is a sin because they think it's wrong and they think they're going against what God would want. And then because they are taking a person's opinion over what they think God would want, they are sinning because they're going against what they think God would want them to do. But if they've gone through a process of thinking about it and thinking this is literally meaningless and it doesn't matter, and because of that, if I'm sort of trying to reach some people who are eating meat sacrificed to idols and they offer me some, and it would be terribly rude for me to say no, it just doesn't matter, I'm going to be okay. But it's a real complicated issue because with this sort of thing, exactly as you were saying, George, people have their personal boundaries, and people have their various different beliefs about different things. So in the music, in general, so there can be just general music about bad stuff, but there's also kind of really like calling on demony music, and then and so I think that people really have to make up their own mind. But I think as well they kind of in a way need to be cautious and really think it through and kind of examine that, like I say, that passage. I mean, if it's just music, it's meaningless to you and it's not influencing you in any way, then it's just music. But but then again, if there's a band that's going out of their way to denigrate the church and Christ and God and belittle and like humiliate sort of Christians or whatever, then is it great for you to wander around with their t-shirt? Perhaps not. And then it's doubly upgraded when if you're in a ministry and you're the one who's leading the ministry, and then you sort of promote something that's sort of not great, then again you're leading people off on a different path. So it's not a straightforward issue, and it is.
I mean, I think at some areas, I think there are, in certain cases, I think certain things worth challenging. To the worth like for us to challenge them, but again, for me, it goes back. In the end of the day, it's not my choice to make. If someone wants to keep coming to our meetings with a cradle of filth T-shirt saying Jesus is CUNT, it's like, okay, like I can't make you. I won't make you stop wearing it.
Oh.
But I might have you like having that conversation every time we meet, though. If why you believe, like let's talk about it.
Yeah,
but in a way that's not like come here to humiliate you. Like, hey, let's talk about it. You wear this to a church meeting. Let's talk about it.
Well, exactly, and we've had a similar thing where we've had people wear stuff, and then after the meeting, I said, they were wearing a thing. This was our early days. It's like, should we actually say anything or not? Like, what's the situation? And Christian was just like, and very sensibly, we just don't mention it at all ever. But I think we need to just show them a good way to be, and hope that as they get more and more involved with it, that the spirit will get more and more involved with them, and they'll get challenged in themselves, and then they'll start asking us, you remember those things I was wearing, and did you ever have a problem with them? And you think, well, it's not for me. But then you might ask you, and you might say, well, maybe not, but
to what I said, I think it also comes because like there's always the other side that Christians tend to be very so sensitive. It's like, and like that's again like I might decide not to say anything, but it's like Christians so sensitive they get offended by anything. It's like like, oh god, that's like
exactly, Joe. I think there's plenty of times you just need to just chill out, like relax. Because the other thing is
First of all, if you get offended, you actually
Yeah.
that's the purpose of doing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if someone wears a T-shirt like this, they're doing it to offend. So you
Exactly.
getting
Like,
offended, you actually
Sometimes,
yeah,
yeah.
totally
you
makes-
get the box. Like
I mean,
I
Yeah.
got offended you. Yes, like I
Yeah.
won.
You played into their hands.
You play the
That's what they
game,
wanted.
basically.
yeah, exactly. And it's fine. It's cool. You know, if they come along with that, then clearly they want to provoke, and that's great. Like they're actually interested in some way. And okay, you might say it's some sort of negative thing, but that doesn't change how I'm going to treat. I'm not going to treat them any differently to any other person, because
Yeah,
how am I going to
definitely.
act? Well, I'm going to try and love them in whatever way that
Mm.
looks like. That's just being nice to them when I first meet them, and you know, and I mean, I listen to Cradle of Filth. I quite like Cradle of Filth. Obviously, there's some stuff that's really difficult, but they're amazing artists and musicians
yeah.
and all the rest. And so I think it might be 1 Corinthians 8 you're referring to, Alex, with the meat offered to idols. But again, I think one of the ways in which I've always talked about this whole area is that I don't want to approach what I listen to in any way with a sort of spirit of fear and timidity, because again, like, we haven't been given that spirit. That's not the spirit we have. And so when I approach anything that I'm listening to, often I approach it almost apologetically. I mean, I listen to a lot of extreme metal. I listen to a lot of death metal. Most of the time, I don't
You're
need
my
to
kind of
engage
guy.
with the lyrics because I can't tell what they're saying anyway. Okay, so that's totally fine. But there are plenty of times when I want to listen to it because it helps me to engage. I want to hear, what's being said, how's it being talked about. How are Christians being talked about in our scene? That's really cool. That's interesting to know. That's really helpful to know, especially if you're someone who is, running a thing where people who are Christians and who are metalheads are coming along to. Like, it's good to know, what are we listening to? Like, people, like what's going into our ears
I mean,
and our mind.
within metalheads, like what bands you listen is like one of the most common discussions. Like British talk about the weather all the time. Metalheads talk about what bands are you listening, and then like
Totally.
you're gonna die because you listen to some. Some metalheads don't they're not so different from Christians, because like the same way denominations are fighting each other, like the same way like you have the purists, like the black metalers, the cult, you only listen to that like God forgotten tape that was buried under the ground for 5 years.
The preacher, George. Yeah, exactly. Or like as if people aren't bigoted about the different music that we can listen to. Of course they are. Inside and outside of the Christian.
It's very interesting because on the episode we're recording a few days ago with Roger, that will be live at some point. At some point we were talking. One of the things we were discussing in that episode about like music and like listening to, the offensiveness and of some bands, and we were talking about like bands like Cannibal Corpse and Cattle Decapitation, for instance. And I say like, when I'm listening to them, like I don't really care much about the lyrics. I mean, you can't understand what George Corpse Grinder is saying anyway. Like, he sings so deep that you can't make what he's saying anyway. Like, you're just guessing you'll say something disgusting and offensive. But when I go to a gig, I don't care about the lyrics. I want therefore to release tension, like, because I'm fed up with life and I want to spend 45 minutes jumping on people and, and that's it, release tension. And like Cannibal Corpse give me that thing, like it help me release tension. I mean, a lot of times, sometimes at work, if I have a very long and stressful day at work, on my way home, I may hit like some Taking the Head of Goliath or Broken Flesh or Cannibal Corpse, and it's like, and that 15 minutes drive home, like I don't need anything else. I'm fine now. Like, I don't know what they were saying on the songs. I don't care, and that's not what I want.
I think that I mean, one of the things we talked about is sometimes people disagree, and they disagree when they're in a Christian context, and this is not unique to the Christian context, but I mean, and people disagree to various degrees. But I mean, in a way, sometimes I think we make too much of that as well. I mean, there was like in our regular church, there was like an older lady who was like, oh, that T-shirt has a skull on it. It's like, well, I mean, it's a skull. I mean, it's not even anything bad. But so it's variations, and I just think we worry about these things too much in a way. Almost, it's just like, yeah, we're metalheads, and we look different, but and the way I always think of it is it's like a culture, and our regular church is always talking about being a multicultural church, and that involves people from different countries, people from different languages, people from different cultures, but it also involves people from different cultures within the UK or whatever, and there are many, it's not just metalheads and normal people. It's like there are loads of different types of culture, and we would like to reach all of them. But with our kind of thing, there's a lot of overlap into all these other areas, which is in essence where we've gone with it. But you were also saying about how people disagree about their music. Normal metalheads disagree about this type of music, that type of music. And it was interesting because I remember when I was first, a Christian and stuff, and then used to carry on being in metal clubs and blah blah, and someone was like, oh, don't you find that it's all bad stuff and blah, and but I was like, actually no, because I find that actually at a pub with alternative people, you've got goths and metalers and punks and all this, and a lot of them are thinking a great deal about death and the afterlife and hell and heaven and society and what's wrong with society, what's wrong with religion, what's wrong with the established church and all this sort of thing. So the conversation is going on. So for Christians to not be there to talk about it and say, hey, here's it, and I find as well, not only that, but there's a lot of people of faith. There's lots of Wiccan people, there's lots of Christians there already, and then there's lots of very strong atheist people who, it's such a strong atheism, it's a religion of its own, because they very sternly believe that it's very, definitely true, that it's nothing.
How you call them? Militant atheists.
Yeah, militant, but they're not agnostic in any way. They're not like, you can't know. They're like, I know that there definitely isn't. And it's like, well, that's equally far the other way. So, but like I say, all these conversations are happening anyway. And I would say, in a way, they're happening a lot more in metal clubs and goth bars and all that than they are at football matches and coffee shops and stuff like that.
They don't realize a lot of, as you said, like a lot of those people, like they're spiritually aware, to put it this way. So they are always like, I mean, if you see like how many people going like to mediums and looking for clairvoyance meetings and do Ouija boards and tarot cards, and like they may say, oh no, I'm not religious, I'm doing it for fun, like, but it's never just for fun, because why you don't play poker then, like if you want to play with, it's like so there is a lot, like people, the majority of people, I think most people, there is like a, and I think in a way it's wired in us as a species, like to keep looking for meaning and that yearning for spirituality, to find out why I'm here, who created me, like
exactly,
not me personally, who created like everything, and
of course, and I think
because you can explain it like scientifically. A question we put, like when we did our episodes about the dinosaurs, and we did an episode about dinosaurs and evolution, and I thought it's kind of, if you take like a strictly non-theistic creation story, you still have the same paradox. So you say like the ever existing God, yeah, it's a paradox, but then if you say like that nonsense, then you end up with the other paradox of an ever-existing universe.
I think one of the things that was really interesting that you mentioned there was that whole thing of people exploring and people wanting, being spiritual, and they're having these conversations. But what I find often in the metal scene is that much of the sort of vitriol that is there often exists for a good reason. Like there's plenty of us who have been burned by church and, well, by the people within church, I should say, really. It's Christians who get it wrong and upset people and hurt people and all the rest. And man, there's plenty of Christians in the Christian church who got baggage from being Christians, let alone those who.
And a lot of them, they have like really serious baggages. Like they have
exactly.
There's only inviting them to church can trigger a lot of trauma.
Precisely, and that's another reason why we do Sacred Conclave where we do and all that sort of thing, because it removes a lot of that. But most of it I find is that if there's anger and vitriol towards, let's say, organized religion, the sort of organized church, often it's written off that there is no possible way that the Christian faith could have anything to say to me to help or to be beneficial in any way. And I think often that it's in the conversations that I've ended up having where I simply express, well, this is what following Christ means for me. This is how I read the Bible, and this is how, and I have what many would call a very sort of, I suppose, more orthodox, some might say sort of conservative understanding of Scripture. And yet I'm still writing, death metal and running stuff in a metal pub in a city, and so there's a lot of things people going, I don't quite get all of this, because actually it's challenging stereotypes that people have about what is a Christian and actually what really is Christianity. Because one of the things that if you're a Christian, you're kind of expected to act certain ways. And most Christians and most people these days would not expect Christians to dress like we do and to look like we do. So we're already automatically challenging these prejudices and stereotypes that people have about Christians. And actually, a lot of what we've ended up experiencing, I would say, in doing Metal Church and in doing Sacred Conclave, it's just been the experience of people trying to process how is it that you can be someone who is authentic? Because being a metalhead and being a Christian, they don't go together. Because Christianity, in my mind, stands for this. It stands for the establishment and being a sheep and blah 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 blah. And metalhead is definitely not about the establishment and being a sheep and so on. So they're like, these are two things that do not go together. And the question is, are you authentic? Like, are you for real? Are you straight up and down? And so actually a lot of my experience in the metal scene as a Christian has actually been almost having to prove that I'm actually a real metalhead, because that shouldn't go together with being a Christian. I don't know if that's been your experience.
I mean, sometimes I'm going, because like where we live, it doesn't have there are a lot of metalheads, but it's no, like there used to be like a big alternative scene and clubs and like lives, but now there's no much, like a lot of like local bands that they kind of, it's mostly word of mouth, the gigs. So if you don't know people with the bands, you don't know that the gigs are happening. So it's kind of very weird, and and sometimes I walk into a place and into a gig, and I don't realize what it's on me. So I get in. I have my cap is downstairs. So I have a cap, a baseball cap, which I have a patch on the side. I'm the Christian the devil warned you about, and next to it is a Cannibal Corpse patch. And then I'm wearing a death t-shirt
Nice.
with like crosses and like Christian tattoos, and then like a Resident Evil. And sometimes I don't realize how confusing I may look to people.
A walking contradiction. What's going on? Absolutely, yeah.
And then I have like, literally I have like this like Greek Orthodox Christian symbol. Next to it I have a little nightmares tattoo. It's like, what are you?
Well, that's the thing. And one of the things you just said was, in your area, the community around it all is sort of gone under and stuff. Well, you know, in Bristol, it's a big place, and the scene continues. But we found that over lockdown, with all the pubs, things happening, gigs stopping, blah, 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 for years, people haven't seen each other. And what we've also found, because Bristol has always been a very transient place, that lots and lots of people have moved to Bristol within the last sort of 2 or 3 years, and then not really got to know anybody before lockdown, or they come during lockdown or whatever, and they've been here for ages and basically don't know anybody who's like them. They don't know any other metalers, they don't know any role players, they don't know anybody who likes board games, whatever. So we're in a way that's one of the things that we do. But in general,
So you act like a social club in some
Yeah.
cases, basically.
well, kind of, yeah. It's just bringing people together. What we'd say is we're building community. So we're intentionally trying to make a nice community that's accessible for people, that's kind, that's like all the standard stuff like on Facebook, like, oh, we can't be horrible to each other, and you can't say horrible things about other people's like faith or whatever, and
Why not?
Whatever. Well, that's just the thing. We just make it so that people can't be horrible about any faith. So easy. But and just a place of tolerance and kindness, and and then we gather people together for socials, and then we introduce people to people who like the similar stuff to them. So if they're a gamer, you're like, oh, what kind of games do you like? Oh, this kind of thing. Oh, come and meet this person. They play all those games. Or oh, what kind of music do you like? Oh, I'm into all this. And oh, great. Well, come and meet this person. And I think there's a gig on in like a month's time. You could kind of maybe, I think they're going, and then we sort people out so that they got gig mates and stuff like that. And then just gradually we're connecting people together and building that community so that everybody knows each other, and it's within a small subculture. So
as you say, you're talking about this, it kind of comes to me that that's actually a very Jesus-y thing to do, because you because what you do, you essentially bring in people that they have, not necessarily not having friends, but they may not having friends that they have the same interests with them, like role playing or board game and kind of.
Yeah, George, literally.
Okay, there's a
Exactly.
this is more like people like you, and if you don't,
Yes. But that's the
we
thing.
we are Christians and we do what we do, but this is your community, you actually get people out of loneliness.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And how many of us in the scene, have our mental health battles, and we have our social anxieties, and there's loads of us in the scene have experienced that and are experiencing that. And actually, that's why we want to make everything just real low barrier of entry. It's just really just come along. Like, there's loads of us who are all feeling the same and experiencing the same. One of the things as well, though, in the interest of being, inclusive and encouraging as a space for people to come and, have those friendships, we're also very much comfortable with people asking tough questions and being real with one another. It's a bit different when you're doing a Facebook group or something. Stuff like that needs a bit more moderating, I suppose. But crumbs, there's no moderation of the community. I mean, people just are who they are, and actually, our hope is that as we we want everybody to model what it is to be a good member of a community. Now, for me and Alex, we take our model from Christ, and so how we are people who want to foster community and not see people marginalized and not see people lonely and all of those things is because that's specifically what Christ told us to do. That's specifically what Paul urges us to do. And so as Christians, like we're just doing that. It's just normal for us, I suppose. Great, it falls in line with loads of other people. Bristol's a very altruistic city. There's lots of great stuff going on. And we fall in line with that, absolutely. And bless it and think it's marvelous. But it's that bringing people together in community, and especially those of us who, after things like lockdown, have experienced real isolation and loneliness, or have moved to the city and just don't know anybody, that they can turn up to a social event where there's 40 other people who probably have dressed very similar to them. There's music on that they like, and they're all about to go to the same gigs together, and so on and so forth. Suddenly it's like, oh, almost instant community. And then, oh, and there's tabletop gaming, or I could totally do that. Oh, there's what? There's Christians here? Oh, I've always wanted to go along to something that, that I've never known what to go to.
But
Oh, these guys are
sometimes
here.
also you may engage, like they may become interested. They come there for the games, and they're like, they never thought like spirituality could be a thing for them. But then
Well-
they had like an interesting conversation, or like someone says a message, and then they kind of suddenly
Well,
become interested.
That's it. It's not so much that we're even talking to people about this stuff, but just by now they know us now. They've come to they've played board games with us like 1,500 times. They know we're a Christian because we occasionally say, "Oh, we've got these different events," or they know there's a Sacred Conclave and all this. And then, like you say, but at their point in their life where they're like, "I wonder what happens when I die," or "I wonder if there is a God," or what, whatever, which every human being, kind of comes across. And even if they're an atheist, they're like, am I right being an atheist? I don't know. They've got people that they know who have different opinions, who are, Christians or whatever. And they could turn to and say, well, actually, I've never really gone to a church before, but and we already talked about challenging their preconceived ideas. It's like, well, my preconceived ideas were not right because you're one, so
Yeah.
maybe I'm interested.
I remember Steve Spickman was telling me when I interviewed him that they had one of their members. She's not a Christian, and she's part of the church, and like she believes in crystals and this kind of like. But she's here every Sunday,
Yeah.
and she's engaged, and like, oh yeah, if you don't want to describe yourself as Christian, then I don't think Jesus cares about how you describe yourself.
And that's why we use the language of we are people who are exploring what it means to follow Christ in the 21st century. Because let's face it, in the rock and metal scene and in the alternative scene, there is plenty of baggage attached even just to the term Christian. And so, yeah, Alex and I are comfortable calling ourselves that. But there's people who come along to Sacred Conclave who certainly wouldn't call themselves a follower of Christ, and they certainly wouldn't use the language of Christian. They're like, I'm exploring, and I like these guys, and I like metal, and we have some interesting discussions, and it's just all very chill and very relaxed.
That's enough, isn't it?
So-
I mean, for me, you can create like a safe space. That's more than half the job.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
expanding God's family with.
Yeah, and like you said before, about some people have been hurt by church or Christian people that they know, but it's just exposing them to more Christians who are different. And because what people need to obviously realize is, because some Christians are bad and I don't like organized religion in general, these things are a non sequitur with whether or not their God actually exists. It's like, I don't like Christians, therefore God doesn't exist. It's like, well, no, that is not how it works.
I found most people then. So I think as we moving more as years goes, strict atheism becomes even rarer, and that's like data shows. Like, although like we know now that Christians are not the majority in the UK anymore, but in a way, people might live in religions, but they don't live the divine. So atheism becomes, at least like in Europe, becomes like the less likely response. And I'm not saying that people don't lose their they don't become atheists, but it becomes less and less like likely for someone to leave church and become an atheist. They most like go into like New Age, Google stuff, like other. So they still remain within like a spiritual world.
Yeah, and I think that's partly because of we're now post Christendom, like you said. We have certainly in the UK, less than half the population even identify as Christians, let alone the tiny percent that actually go to church each week, which is about 2 to 3% of Britons go to church each week. So we're post Christendom, but we're a postmodern. We're all postmodern now. We live in the postmodern world, and so therefore, it's it's absolutely fitting with that if you expect that people actually do have some sort of deep-seated desire to connect with the divine, the transcendent, shall we say, that in a postmodern world it becomes much easier to essentially fashion that for yourself, and to engage in how it is that you experience some sort of transcendent element to life in your own way. That's really the heart of, it's what your reality is, it's what your truth is, as of course would be the major axiom of sort of postmodernism. So when you're looking at, again, what does it mean to follow Christ in the 21st century, part of having that conversation is in the backdrop of the fact that we don't have a world where people are either Christian or not, like that, which is what it was, let's say, 50 years ago. We kind of thought like that, in or out. Are you in the church? Are you outside of the church? It's just, we just tend not to think like that, or increasingly people are not thinking in those kind of really black and white terms, and that things are much looser and much grayer because they're much more individualized. And so that becomes a much more complex conversation to have.
But I think because people have a lot more access to information now, especially like younger generation. It's not like that it used to be up to about the early 2000s, but internet was still, it was still there. It was good, but it wasn't like as it is today, that you can Google anything and you can find like thousands of results, and you can see like, and then you like, we actually we having conversation with like, because like denominations like mine, the Salvation Army and the Church of England, there's a lot of tension, especially with the global south. We're a lot more like conservative, more fundamentalist, but at the same time, their children now with the access to internet, they start asking questions about like, transgenderism, the non-binary, like, because they found them online. Their parents, they was like, whatever the pastor says, it goes unchallenged, and no one had any other source of information. So the world's changing really fast, and kind of in a lot of cases the mainstream church is struggling to catch up. And I think where areas where we are moving, we kind of in a very privileged space, because we are there already. We are part of those communities. We're always been part of those communities. The only thing like that to start the conversation, basically, isn't it?
And again, the other thing is that's kind of, there's a lack of authenticity about being part of, the church, the traditional church, and then trying to move in the metal scene and being part of the metal subculture or something. It's as if it was like one subculture trying to muscle in on another subculture, and it just didn't really fit. I mean, crumbs, we're just who we are.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like
Precisely.
as I was saying with subcultures, it's you can't take Jesus a subculture if you're not part of that subculture already. So you can't just like like go to EMP and buy some clothes and then I'm gonna start ministering to gods, for instance. Like, it's not the same thing with steampunk. So it's like I can't go and I can't take the message to the steampunks, because I'm not a steampunk. Like, I don't know. I found the culture very interesting and quite fun, but it's kind of, I don't know the culture. Like, I would be there like a fly on the wall. It's like, and it will show people will get it straight away. Like, there's something wrong with you. You have an agenda. Yeah, like.
Yeah, and as metalheads, we know what it's like when we see it a mile off, when we just see a lack of authenticity, and when we just see people who basically look.
You ask him to name 3 songs or something like. Name 3 songs.
There you go, exactly. And you just got that sort of like, oh my days, And now, of course, now we can be quite judgy. Hey, maybe they just listened to their first bit of metal this last week and they're now dipping
no.
all that sort of thing. But let's face it, it's not normally the case.
I mean, I got in the early days, and when we were like teenagers, we have this friend that at that stage in her life, she was like really black metal, really purist black metal, like late 90s now. And she was like, if I don't know every single detail about the band, I'm not wearing the t-shirts. And like, we're talking about the 90s now, that your only source of information was Metal Hammer.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, that's it. That's proper purist, proper cunt. But
Proper
yeah,
evangelical.
yeah, there you go. But again, I suppose this is for me where it's again, we need to be boots on the ground real, in that every person is in all sorts of places with their faith walk, with their experience with metal, and they might identify as a metalhead, and they just haven't had a chance to listen to anywhere near as much. I've got to be careful about not being really sniffy and really judgmental about that and thinking, oh, you're a true metalhead and all that kind of thing. And I'm totally prone to those kind of, well, prejudicial, stereotypical reactions that I need to be careful of as well, because again, that's not really helpful for encouraging people into the metal
At the same time,
community,
we're human, isn't it? It's kind of, and I see a lot of things that they've been blamed to church. They're actually human characteristics. They say, like, we're talking about earlier disagreeing. It's not a Christian thing. It's humans in general. We're very uncomfortable sitting with people we disagree with.
So true.
I mean, look at your local Facebook group. Like, and you lose hope for humanity, basically. Like you say, we're doomed. Like, there's no hope. Like we rather like have a meteorite like thrown now. That's like end the species for good. Like, but then when you see the bigger picture, you see all that the kindness and like. I mean, I'm conscious of time. So I said, closing, because I don't think you went into like how the conclave started. So if you'd like 5 minutes, as a closing remark, one last thing the preacher said for the 10th time.
Yeah. It really all came out of lockdown. It wasn't that long before lockdown, maybe the year before, that Alex and I met, and I was already running this sort of metal church thing, as Alex mentioned, and he already had like a big role-playing group, Facebook role-playing group with hundreds of members, thousands of members in. I think I had a big tabletop gaming network Facebook group as well, and I was doing events and meetups and things like that with all of that. And so it was when lockdown then happened, and we were like, oh crumbs, we can't meet, we can't really do a lot here. That was when the wheels started turning in terms of, once lockdown's finished, what can we do? What's going to be different? Is there something to be born out of the ashes, as it were, of what we were doing? So,
yeah. Are you connected like with a denomination or I would say normal church? And it's kind of, I'm very proud we're not normal church. So there's the normal church and there's the weird church, which it is us. Like, so we do weird church, and then like, so are you connected like with or like supported or connected with a mainstream church?
Very relationally, Alex and I go to the same, more mainstream church on a Sunday together, as it were, and we're part of that community. And so, and we do a lot with that community as well. We're heavily involved.
I'm thinking mostly about the conclave itself. So.
Yeah. And so, again, like relationally, yes, because we're members of that church, and we're also doing this thing. But in terms of like any like really official ties, no. I mean, there's no.
So everything's run by you, by the people of the.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And so it's just.
To be honest, for me it's a very important question, because I always make this point, because one of the things I would like to get out is that if you 3 metalheads to a church, or like between 2 churches, you don't need like necessarily a denomination to start something, for get up your butt and start it. Do it yourself. Like if you're 3 people, like you're more than enough. Jesus said, like where 2 or 3 gathering my name, I'm there. So like, off you go. Like,
I think we'd agree with that. I think maybe perhaps what you're driving at is, so I mean, the actual Sacred Conclave thing is essentially in itself non-denominational. It's not like, so we have people from all different churches from around Bristol, different denominations from around Bristol. So we've got Anglicans, evangelicals, we've got Greek Orthodox, and all different people, whatever. And and we're not pursuing a specific type of thing. But what I wanted to say was the whole, in some ways, one of the points of it is that as we gather together people who are of faith of various churches or denominations, different like flavors of Christian or whatever, or people just seeking, it's just to give those people the sense that they're not alone. So they might go off to a church where there's 150 people and they're the only metaler, and they look different and they like different stuff and blah, blah, blah. But they know that they, once a month, they meet up with 20 other people who are just like them, who also go to different churches like the same. And so they don't have that kind of, oh, I'm different, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I need to change, nobody likes me. They're like, yeah, I've got friends who are like me, they're in other churches, that's cool.
And to resist peer pressure is a big thing. You need like a lot of men. I mean, I need. It's a lot of. It's hard work.
Yeah.
to resist peer pressure to look the same with the rest of the congregation.
Exactly.
Even if no one tells you to do it, like just that.
Exactly. And I mean, maybe like you're saying, final thoughts, which is that I've had people join our normal like regular church, and they've been alternative in some way, and then they've become a Christian all of a sudden. Like they've had a miraculous encounter with God, and they've become a Christian, and then because of unconscious peer pressure, not being told, they decide that they want to change their look to be more like everybody else. And I remember having a conversation with somebody being like, if you want to change your look, that's all cool, yeah, great. But if you feel like you're changing your look because you want to fit in with everybody else and that you can't be who you were before, you don't need to do that. That's not necessary. And I read a book very early on when I became a Christian about evangelism in general, and and the woman who wrote it was just saying, if you go out in the street and you talk to a punk and then they become a Christian, you should then have a Christian who's a punk in your church. They don't become not a punk anymore. Yeah. Because that's the kind of what we were talking about, multicultural element. You got all people. If you meet somebody who's from Africa and they join your church, and you don't try and make them British. It's like that's not how it works. You just are who you are. I mean, you don't have to change what you dress.
We saw the results of this, isn't it? Like imperialistic Christianity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We saw we're reaping those fruits now, and it's not good.
Well, that's it. And everybody who's of a different culture brings something to the table, different stuff, different preconceptions. That then when you examine scripture, you're not all attacking it from, oh, well, this doesn't, Jesus did this. That doesn't sound very British. It can't be right. Like you need people of different cultures and different points of view and different lifestyles and stuff, like different ages.
He wasn't talking about the weather much, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
The weather and metal, that's what we cover. We just talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
Well said, Alex.
So where people can find you?
So we've got a website, which is probably the easiest place, which is just conclavenetwork.com.
Which we're gonna leave the links to the description and show notes depending where you're watching or listening.
Yeah, so if they hit conclavenetwork.com, they can, if they don't like Facebook, they can sign up to our newsletter and get a once a month update, and they can use the Google Calendar there to see all the events which we are running. And even if people aren't, in Bristol, they're like, Cardiff, Taunton, somewhere that's an hour's drive away, but they, we expect that those people, we already have people from Swindon and Wales and Birmingham, stuff like that, visit or come regularly. So that's great. But when you go to the website, if you do like Facebook, you've got all the links then to click yourself into the various groups or Instagram, and you can then you can engage with and for example, we had somebody join from Birmingham, and they were like, "Oh, this is great," but I'm from Birmingham. And I was like, "Well, there's one in Birmingham that you can, there's a different thing in Birmingham that you can
Matt
go
is
to."
there, like
Yeah, exactly. So,
So
here's
that's the
the
other thing-
information, and
that's
you know,
the other thing I love doing with that. It's like kind of actually getting out like those people exist, and if you want to know about them, there's an interview about them. And I mean
Yeah.
that's if you when that goes live, you're welcome to like share it to your medias and like
yeah.
embed it anywhere you want it. But yeah, I have so much fun talking about you with you today.
Bless you, mate. It's been great.
Yeah. So I never know how things are gonna go. So it's kind of like always like very interesting to do those interviews, and for a change, not to talk all the time.
That's good. Thank
So
you very much.
yes, thank you for coming.
Off the Brit as well,
And
definitely. So.
so whoever listen, go find those guys, and on Facebook they have a Facebook page as well, I think, or group.
Yeah.
So I don't know what we're gonna listen in 2 weeks time, because the way I edit I'm editing stuff, I don't know, they're just coming as they come. But yeah, so tune in 2 weeks time for another episode. Until next time, guys, take care everyone, and yeah, bye.
Bye.